احنا معانا مداخلة من أمريكا مع دكتورة جاكي سومير، مدير رأس المال والابتكار والمشاركة في ريفي فيد للحلول هدر الطعام بأمريكا. هلو دكتور.
Yes, hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we are hear you. You are so welcome.
Great, are you ready for me to share my screen and start?
Yes, go ahead.
All right. All right, let me know if you can't see the screen. Otherwise, we'll go ahead and get started. All right, well, thank you everyone so much for having me. It's morning time here for me here. I know it's afternoon, evening for you, so I hope it's been a wonderful day. I'm very excited to be a part of the event that you're having. My name is Jackie Suggitt. I am with Refed. For those of you who may not be familiar with Refed, our vision is a sustainable, resilient, and inclusive food system, and we do that primarily through 3 different areas of work. The first is data and insights. We are known in the U.S. as kind of the central food waste data source. We view data as being very key to addressing food waste. You can't manage what you don't measure, so we disseminate data and the insights that come from it to inform and motivate progress. Our second area of work is around capital and innovation. Food waste is a huge topic and requires large amounts of funding, so we work with a lot of different capital providers of all types to spur innovation and to scale high impact initiatives. And finally, stakeholder engagement. Food waste is a food system-wide problem, so we work to mobilize and connect stakeholders in mutually beneficial ways. A lot has changed in the world the last few years, and so I'm showing some of these on the slide here. But these are a few things we've been seeing in the US since COVID first started affecting the food system back in 2020 and 2021. You're probably seeing very similar things there and around the globe. Ongoing supply chain disruptions from the pandemic, from the war in Ukraine, from rising fuel costs, etc. Shortages of labor for a range of different food-related jobs, everything from on-farm all the way through to consumer-facing businesses, coupled with the rising in food delivery. This was initially a requirement during the pandemic, but if you're anything like me, you've now become somewhat reliant on this food delivery, and we're using it more now than we've used it in the past. All of this leads to less predictability in the food system. Will I actually be able to find the things I need when I go to the store? But also a sense that things should be there exactly when we want them, since we're used to this online ordering environment. All of that is giving more chances for food to go to waste. At the same time, food prices are rising around the world. In the US, we're seeing an average of a 10% increase in food prices compared to the same time last year. We have a nationwide trucker shortage, which is a tough job to begin with, but now has gotten even worse. And we're seeing a series of natural disasters, floods, hurricanes, fires, where people are struggling to access food. This is leading to people seeing food as more precious. And as painful as it is to say, some of these forces actually work in our favor from a food waste perspective, because people are viewing food as a precious commodity and are less inclined to waste it in those type of situations. Finally, we have bigger macro challenges like climate change. We're feeling those impacts through weather events every day. We have general consumer anxiety about the state of the world, and especially the state of the economy with rising inflation. And then we have the ups and downs of living through COVID these past few years. We've been told that through all of this, consumers are turning to food because it's something they can control and it's a source of comfort. So that really shows that we have an opportunity to influence consumer food behavior. All of this to say that we are truly in a food waste moment. These factors are aligning around the world to get people to understand the critical importance of food waste and in reducing food waste, and we want to do something about it. So that's why we're here at Refed. I know that's why many of you are here doing the work that you do, so thank you so much for that. I want to take a minute to show kind of a snapshot of food waste data globally, and then I have some US numbers in here too, but want to set the stage with the data before we talk about the solutions and what we can be doing about it and some of the innovation that's happening in this space. So some of these numbers may be familiar to you, but globally about 1/3 of food is wasted. It's $1 trillion in value that we're wasting and accounts for 8% of our global greenhouse gas emissions. Food needs to be farmed, harvested, caught, transported, processed, packaged, cooked. So there's a lot of different stages where emissions become relevant and that requires energy to produce. So that's why we see it being such a high percentage of our greenhouse gas emissions. But there's a lot of things happening to fight this around the world. So various national and international bodies, including the United Nations, national governments, global entities like the Consumer Goods Forum, all have aligned around a target of a 50% reduction in the amount of food waste by the year 2030. These next few slides are more US-centric data, but I'm sure probably comparable in many other places around the world. And really the message that they're showing, I think, is what is important here. So surplus food happens across the entire supply chain. It's often considered to be a singular problem, but it's an entirely different situation for 100 tons of broccoli that goes unharvested on a farm compared to a half-full platter of uneaten broccoli that I throw in my garbage at home. Loss and waste occurs at every stage of the supply chain. As I mentioned, the majority is happening in consumer-facing businesses, such as retailers and restaurants, as well as in consumer homes. Food waste is also very systemic in nature, so it's important to recognize that what happens at one stage of the supply chain is often influenced by what happens at another. For example, that farm that threw away broccoli, they may not have harvested all of it because it doesn't meet the produce specifications set by retailers. And those retailers set produce specifications based on standards that consumers have and how they spend their dollars. So it truly is an end-to-end issue and not, unfortunately, as simple as tackling it in a single point within the supply chain. So what are the impacts of this waste? Here's what we're seeing in the US. So 35% of food is going uneaten. It's a $408 billion opportunity for us. You can see some of the environmental impacts here from our own greenhouse gas emissions, water use, cropland. And it's a quarter of our landfill. It's the #1 input in our landfills, which is shocking. Each year, if we were to reduce food waste by 50%, it would be like taking 16 million cars off the road. It would recover the equivalent of 4 billion meals. And something I just learned that I find really interesting is that it would lead to a 17% reduction in biodiversity loss, which is something that I had not always associated with food waste reduction in the past. So another important impact of addressing this issue. I personally come from a public health background, so I'm really interested in the intersection between food waste and public health. According to Feeding America in the US, we have 1 in 8 Americans that are food insecure, meaning they lack access to sufficient, affordable, and nutritious food. And food insecurity is a very complex issue. It's caused by a range of factors, but it is important, I think, to note that while so much food is going to waste that is perfectly edible, we also have people that don't have access to this food. So it's not a one-to-one comparison of 1 meal saved and 1 meal served, but I do think it shows inefficiencies in our supply chain that could be putting this food to better use. It's also really interesting to note how this affects the food that we produce. So United Nations predicts that we'll need to increase our global food supply by over 50% by 2050 in order to feed our growing population, which begs the question, where will that come from? Are we going to be using new land to produce food, or are we going to have to use the food that we're already growing and not let it go to waste? At the same time, we know that agricultural productivity around the world has declined by 21% due to the effects of climate change, so we actually have less food available. So we really need to be making better use of the food that we're already growing and not relying on the ability to use more land or produce more food. So with all that data behind us, I want to shift now for a minute and focus instead on what ReFed has been doing about it and what we as a broader ecosystem can be doing about this issue. Almost 2 years ago now, ReFed published the Roadmap to 2030, which is our vision of how we can actually get to this 50% reduction in food waste. You'll notice that these 7 action areas align with the hierarchy of prevention, rescue, and recycling. It's very intentional that it's heavy on the prevention side. I think we generally have a decent idea of what it means to recover and rescue food, and we have a decent understanding of what it means to recycle food. But we really emphasize prevention, and we push people to be preventing food waste, but it's hard to say how. And I don't think there's been a lot of guidance on how we prevent food waste. So we really tried to build that out a bit to give some guidance on what we mean. So very quickly, to go through what these 7 different action areas entail. Optimize the harvest is about avoiding overproduction and then harvesting as much as possible. Enhancing product distribution is about largely leveraging technology to create smart systems that help us efficiently move products. This is to maximize freshness and selling time. Refining product management is about aligning purchases with sales as closely as possible and then finding secondary outlets for surplus food. Maximizing product utilization. This is all about designing our facilities, our operations, our menus to use as much of each food type as possible. This is also where we talk about upcycling surplus and byproducts into food products for humans or animals. Next is reshaping consumer environments. This is really intentional how we use this language. We don't just want to rely on educating consumers and relying on them to change their own behavior, but instead we want to help drive them towards better food management by creating environments that makes it hard for them to waste food. How can we make using food easy? Then moving into rescue, we have strengthened food rescue. We have really robust and old food rescue systems all around the world. So this is about improving and strengthening those by increasing capacity and communication. And then finally, we have recycle anything remaining. This is about finding highest and best uses for all the remaining food in order to capture nutrients, energy, and other residual value. So within these 7 action areas, again, this is our vision of how we actually get to the 50% reduction. ReFed has modeled over 40 different solutions that are actually tactical things that can be implemented. And I know you can't read this slide if you can see it. The font is very small, but it's meant to visually illustrate for you that each of these 7 action areas is really focused on a much broader set of specific solutions. So, for example, anything from gleaning on farm to standardizing date labels to consumer education campaigns and minimizing on-hand inventory. So each of these little green boxes is something that we've modeled out to show what it would cost to implement this solution, what are the actions that need to be taken, and then what are the social, environmental, and financial impacts of implementing those solutions. So within this framework, these 7 action areas, there are a few things that I think that all of us can be doing to be addressing food loss and waste. The first is leveraging data and insights. As I mentioned earlier, we are very focused on data and insights. Everything we do starts with the data. This is something I think that needs to be applied across all of our food waste reduction work. We need to start with the data, understand what it's telling us, and then use that data to inform action. Something that we have been using here at ReFed is what we call the insights engine. This is really the data backbone to that roadmap I just shared in those 7 action areas. It consists of 6 different tools. I included a few visuals in here that I'll go through quickly just to illustrate the type of data that is possible to inform the work that we're doing. The first is a food waste monitor. This is an interactive tool that's all about understanding how much food is going to waste, where it's going, and why it's being wasted. And it can be toggled back and forth between different geographies, years, food types, etc. The second is a solutions database. So across those 7 action areas, this ranks the various solutions by different metrics. If you want to prioritize it based on net financial benefit, climate, water, jobs, etc., this is just a different way to analyze all the different solutions. You can also dive deep into the solutions to understand, as I said, the impact potentials and the financial needs in order to implement these solutions. The third tool is the solution provider directory. This is all about connecting those that are fighting food waste with on-the-ground solution providers that can be partnered with in order to implement specific solutions. It's essentially a phone book, but contact information for about 1,500 different solution providers. The next tool, my personal favorite, is the impact calculator. This allows users to go in and say, here's a practice that I'm doing, or here's a practice that I want to do. What are going to be the impacts of that? We see this used a lot to build a business case internally to support the investment in and implementation of various food waste solutions. We have a brand new capital tracker. This tracks the amount of money that has been coming into food waste or needs to be coming into food waste, the type of capital that it is and where it's going. And then finally, we have a policy tracker. This is focusing on different current and hopefully someday pending policies across the US, the implications that they have on food waste, as well as some best-in-class policy examples. So all of that to show that I really think we need to start with data and use that data to inform action. The second key behavior I think that we can be doing more to advance our food waste efforts is to be working with innovative funding models. There's a lot of funding happening and moving in the food waste space, but there's also the need to think about funding models differently. These are some of the examples of programs that we've developed or been a part of to catalyze capital and innovation in this space, and really trying to shake up funding models to be more effective and efficient in reducing food waste. As one example, the COVID pandemic made it really clear that we needed to handle funding differently. Donors were hearing about all this food going to waste. They were hearing about long lines at food banks. They wanted to do something, but they didn't know where to put their money. At the same time, we had grantees that needed money faster than any traditional funding model would allow. In the end, it was $3.5 million that were granted to 37 different grantees and about 50 million pounds of food waste that were prevented, And our experience with that has led to a lot of really important learnings and the need to continue that type of model. So we've since developed a targeted $100 million circular food solutions platform with our partners at Closed Loop Partners. It's $80 million of investment and then $20 million of grant strategy, with a focus across the entire spectrum of prevention, rescue, and recycling. So if we stop for a minute to look at the challenges facing funders and the needs of innovators, we can be developing new funding models to help accelerate the work. The final kind of general behavior, I think, in best practice is around partnership and thinking about unique partnerships. So in the US, we have a group called the Pacific Coast Food Waste Commitment, the PCFWC. It's a really difficult acronym, but it consists of about 10 state and city jurisdictions, 13 food businesses, and then 3 of the leading nonprofits in the country. It's a public-private partnership. It's a pre-competitive model, all set on meeting a regional goal of 50% reduction by 2030. It mirrors the Target Measure Act framework that was used globally, where these signatories are committing to reduce food waste. We have new measurement approaches and methodologies that we've implemented to really simplify measurement and reporting for food businesses, as well as provide custom analytics and value back to them. We also publicly report on this progress year over year. And then there's the action piece, which is really focused on working groups and pilots. We have 9 active pilots right now, anything from inventory management and ordering technologies to employee engagement to hospitality contracts and catering. But the power in this partnership is the unique mix of people that are here, from government representatives to food businesses to nonprofits, really able to do things that none of them could be doing on their own independently. The key message of this being that food waste takes an ecosystem. It takes all of us. It's a system-wide problem that needs a system-wide solution. These are just an example of the different types of groups that are working to partner across the US and around the world. But we always say that everyone touches the food system, so everyone has some level of responsibility to help us reduce food waste. And that's why we're doing the work that we do. So how are we doing? Let's take a quick snapshot at progress, and then I'll wrap up here. Basically, we still have a long way to go. We think we have reached our peak food waste levels and are starting to see a decline on a per capita basis. We're still reviewing data right now from 2020 and 2021. We hope to publish that around April. That will give us a better sense of what happened during those COVID years. Our best hypothesis at this point is that after the initial shocks to the food system, which caused food waste to spike, that we will actually see it level off and hopefully return to pre-pandemic levels. Importantly, we also think that COVID might have forced consumers and food businesses to develop better food management skills, so we could see the food waste decreasing because of that over time. So that brings us back to our food waste moment and just the thought that I want to end on. This quote really seems to fit it well, although the internet does not know who originally said it. I found at least 3 different sources of where this quote came from, so we'll credit them all. But if not you, then who? And if not now, then when? There's so much momentum that has built these past few years on a topic that has been around for decades, so we really want to capture that momentum. We want to encourage the innovation, the partnerships, the use of data to inform action, to start working together to change the world and to be reducing food waste. So I will end with that and stop presenting my screen and hand it back to the organizers. Thank you.